In the last few years, a number of southern European countries, once considered the EU's fiscal miscreants, have seen remarkable economic turnarounds. Among this group, Portugal and Spain have emerged as standout performers. Spain is probably Europe's fastest growing large economy, and Portugal was even crowned The Economist's best performing economy of 2025. Neither seems to be slowing down. According to Eurostat data released earlier this week, both Spain and Portugal saw their economies expand by 0.8% in the final quarter of 2025, more than double the Eurozone average of 0.3% and equivalent to an annualized rate of over 3%. So in this video, we're going to look at Iberia's ongoing economic boom and whether this can last. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. Now, before we begin, we're not saying everything's rosy. Both Spain and Portugal are facing severe housing crises. Portugal still has some of the lowest wages in the EU, and as we'll explain later in the video, a fair bit of Spain's headline GDP growth is actually just a consequence of immigration. Nonetheless, it's still true that Iberia has enjoyed a remarkable economic turnaround. Only a decade or so ago, for instance, southern European economies like Spain and Portugal were struggling with chronically lower growth and higher debt burdens than their northern European peers. This obviously came to a head in the early 2010s, when Portugal had a debt-to-GDP ratio of about 130% of GDP, and Spain roughly 100%. The austerity measures subsequently imposed on these countries during the Eurozone crisis originally looked like they'd backfired. Growth rates fell, making meaningful reductions in debt-to-GDP ratios nearly impossible, and as recently as a few years ago, there was a sense that the economic gap between North and South was essentially unbridgeable. However, after the pandemic, southern European economies started outperforming their northern peers. In 2022, for instance, when many northern European countries were struggling to bring spending back to pre-pandemic levels, Spain's deficit halved, and Portugal actually ran a primary surplus representing 1.6% of its GDP. You might expect this fiscal tightening to drag on growth, as it did in the 2010s, but that hasn't happened. In fact, in the last few years, the Iberian economies have been posting very solid GDP growth. Spain outperformed the EU average in both 2022 and 2023, and grew by a staggering 3.5% in 2024, way better than the EU average. Spain even beat the US, which has been leading the G7 on most economic metrics for the past few years. In fact, since 2008, Spain has now seen more aggregate GDP growth than Germany, which would have been an unimaginable thing to suggest a decade ago. Last year, this trend only continued, and Spain's economy grew by 2.8% in 2025, nearly double the Eurozone average of 1.5%. It also places the country well ahead of larger peers such as Germany, which expanded by just 0.4%, and France at 1.1%. Now, it's worth noting that some of this is just a function of the fact that Spain has experienced some of the highest levels of immigration in the past couple of years, which have been combined with waves of regularisation for undocumented migrants who've lived in the country for a certain amount of time. Nonetheless, even if you factor this in by looking at per capita rather than aggregate numbers, Spain has still done pretty well. According to IMF data, GDP per capita has grown by an astonishing 40% in dollar terms since the pandemic. Portugal has also been doing pretty well for itself. In 2024, its economy grew by 2.1%, again beating the Eurozone average alongside Spain. Last year was also a good year, expanding by 1.9% throughout 2025. Portugal's strong performance is expected to continue in the coming years too, with the European Commission forecasting GDP growth of above 2% for Portugal in 2026 and 2027, compared to around 1.4% for the EU overall. So, what explains why Spain and Portugal are suddenly doing so well? Well, quite a lot of this is to do with successful labour market reforms, which have basically boosted overall employment. Both countries have seen their overall employment rates rise steadily since the Eurozone crisis, and last year Portugal saw the second highest employment growth in the EU after Croatia. Meanwhile, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's progressive labour reforms, which gave more power to unions and pushed to end precarious short-term contracts, seem to have helped Spanish wages keep pace with inflation, without pushing up unemployment, which has steadily fallen from around 16% in 2021 to 10% today, despite high levels of immigration. Remarkably, Spain and Portugal now have lower unemployment rates than several Nordic countries, including Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark. Finnish unemployment, for instance, has recently risen above 10% for the first time since the 1990s. These relatively strong labour markets have also had two other knock-on consequences. First, they've helped fuel consumption, which is the largest component of GDP in most developed economies. In Spain, household consumption rose by an annualised rate of about 4% last quarter, and in Portugal, a handful of fiscal measures, such as income tax cuts, have helped keep consumption strong, with steady growth in retail sales since the start of 2024, and surveys suggest consumer sentiment is on the rise. Second, they've helped improve the public finances, because higher employment rates mean more people paying taxes and less people on welfare. While they're still pretty high by international standards, both Spain and Portugal have seen their debt-to-GDP ratios fall in recent years, and this trend is expected to continue for the foreseeable future. Spain is on track to run a smaller budget deficit than Germany for the first time in nearly 2 decades, while Portugal is actually forecasting a budget surplus for 2026, somewhat of a rarity in Europe these days. Both countries have also been helped by a rebound in tourism. Following the pandemic, tourism has surged back and now accounts for around 13% of Spain's GDP and roughly 12% of Portugal's. This has played a key role in driving growth, particularly by supporting services, which expanded by an annualised rate of over 3% in Spain in the final quarter of 2025. Finally, both countries have benefited from relatively low energy costs. In Spain, this is largely due to its extensive renewable energy infrastructure and large LNG processing capacity. Portugal too is experiencing a green energy boom and has become one of Europe's leaders in renewables. As a result, electricity prices in the two countries have been considerably lower than in other European countries. These low energy costs have in turn helped to keep inflation down, and relatively in line with the rest of the EU, despite the fact that they're both posting stronger than average GDP growth, which would usually put upwards pressure on prices. Now, this is a big story, and amongst every other big story happening right now, you might feel powerless in the current climate. The problems feel massive, and individual actions can feel meaningless. But what if we told you that you could be part of something bigger, something that actually turns concern into action? Well, that's where our friends at Planet Wild come in. Planet Wild isn't just your usual environmental organisation. It's a passionate community built around a clear focus, protecting and conserving the world we all live in. We're more aware than ever that the world is a scary place, and the state of our planet needs change. So, every single month, the Planet Wild community funds a mission to protect endangered animals, restore our forests, and clean our oceans. They document all these missions in videos here on YouTube, so we can see exactly what we've helped to achieve. The impact we've made will be right before our eyes. From cleaning up Mumbai's plastic river to protecting Europe's last ancient forest, and even saving elephants with the help of bees, Planet Wild will stop at nothing to make the world a better place for every living being on it. So, where do you and I come in? Well, by becoming a member, we're directly funding a brand new nature mission from the comfort of our own home. We support, they execute. If you want to join the growing community making a real difference, Planet Wild is the place to be. Big or small, your difference matters, and you can contribute as little as $6 a month to help protect nature. We're big fans of Planet Wild, so much so that the first 100 people to use code NEWSEU2 will get their first month paid for by us. Just scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description. By joining today, you'll immediately make a difference and even be able to see your impact in less than 30 days on YouTube right here. You can cancel your membership at any time, so there's absolutely no catch, just an easy and remarkable way to create real and lasting change. If you want to see them in action, check out their mission at cleaning up Mumbai's plastic river.